is that, they're probably the future. Some of the changes are going to be that the food's not going to, come into their communities from all over the world the way they have in the past because energy costs will be too high, et cetera. So then how do you begin to think about that in terms of your own community and how it can produce an adequate amount of food? And here's where I think some of the really encouraging news is that there are a lot of people now that are becoming active around food issues and understanding this, and they're recognizing that the food system has to change in order to be there for them in the way that they need. And so these notions of food hubs and food sheds are emerging now, where people in their own communities are getting together, and there's usually a diversity of people, that includes people like bankers and cooperative conservation service, et cetera. And they're starting to talk about, what can we do to make sure that we have an adequate amount of food, in our own community, and then beginning to do that. And there are, like for example, the community of Fresno, California now has made a decision to be a prototype for one of these food shed concepts. And so they're working with a group of people to actually make that happen. Same thing's also happening in Atlanta, Georgia, and there's beginnings of it in the Hawthorne Valley in New York, outside of New York City. So I think you're going to see these emerge as models, which then other people can see, yeah, we could do that in our own community as well. And so I think it's not local in the sense of we're going to produce all our own food, within 50 miles of where we live, but it's local in the sense of, let's think together, work together, and design what's appropriate to our community to secure our food system.
My name is Raven Naramore, and I was born in Lawrence, Kansas, on a hippie commune out north of town. And we were vegetarian organic farmers. My dad grew organic wheat, and we had a flour mill, and my mom raised dairy goats, and we made cheese and yogurt. And almost all the food that we ate came off our farm. It was very simple food. We ate the same thing a lot of the time. But so I grew up very enmeshed in food, worked in the garden. There were 6 children in my family. We were all kind of farm slaves. And I have a lot of memories around food since we were farmers. But when I was 7 years old was the first time I ever made dinner or breakfast for my entire family. And I love to cook, and I always was in the kitchen, and I still cook. And I had my mom's from scratch recipe. There was nothing in a box at our house. Anything that you wanted to make had to be made from scratch. And so I had my mom's recipe for pancakes. And of course we were using whole wheat flour. And so there was all of these flours and all of these ingredients, and I went through, and I came to the salt, and it said 1/4 cup. And so I dutifully put 1/4 cup of salt into the batter. And then I mixed it up, and then I turned the frying pan on, and I made these very cute silver dollar pancakes. I made probably 100 of them for my family. And then they all came down to eat breakfast, and we took one bite, and they tasted like a salt lick. Because of course it was 1/4 teaspoon of salt and not 1/4 cup of salt.
What I was starting to say is that both of my parents came from Europe, and both around their late upper teens. And the way it worked out then, they were very poor, and everybody was very anxious to get out, and they were being persecuted. The Tsar was in Russia, and there was a lot of antagonism toward Jewish people, and they were anyhow, America looked like it was paved in gold. The streets were, that's what they used to say. They came here thinking that the streets were paved with gold. Really? Yeah, it was such an image of wonderland. And I think they felt it when they got here too. It was so really, really good compared with the kind of living they'd had. And you talk about food. That's why I asked you about Fiddler on the Roof, because he'd been around as a milkman with his one cow or whatever. And people sustained themselves just barely on whatever they could. But then when they came here, first one sister came. I don't remember how she happened to be able to do that. But then she got a job, and she saved money, and she sent it so that her next sister could come. And then the two of them saved their money, and slowly but surely they brought their whole family over, which was very significant because they did this for their own family, and that's the one family of this larger extended family that survived, that were not there during the Holocaust. So they came here, they didn't know how to speak the language, but they had each other, their little community, which was very helpful. And they went to work, almost all of them, in the sweatshops. I'm sure you've heard about the sweatshops in those days when the conditions were horrendous, they were closed in and so on. So this, as a result of this life experience, and my father also, they met in the sweatshop. As a result of this this difficult existence, they became pretty politically activist. I mean, they were involved in a strike and this sort of thing. And so that's why my mother was a strange cooker. She used to go out to meetings or whatever it was she was doing politically. I think it was Peace and Freedom, someplace back there. That was her particular interest. And she would come home and she would take an onion and she would throw it in a frying pan. So when we got home, everything smelled good, but nothing was really cooking. And then she'd put up everything, and whenever it got done, she served it. So we ate our meal in the very strangest sequence. Whatever cooked the fastest was what we ate first. And baked potato was, that's what I was starting to tell you, baked potato was our main dessert, because it took forever for the potatoes to bake.
Does mushroom story. Although, being here in Lawrence and at KU, Tim Miller just asked me, I was going to tell a story about mushrooms. He asked me what sort of mushrooms. And it did remind me that there was the student party, the shroom party, that I think got elected. Some people we know. Tim, wasn't it right? Remember the shroom party? I think that was Barry Shalinsky and others. Yeah. But this is the time of year that one finds morels. And, you know, reflecting on the conference, and one of the things I want to say is that for me, this was a very difficult conference to come to because I was gone last weekend. And this weekend, you know, I was hoping to do some gardening and hunt mushrooms. And it is perfect timing. Tomorrow. But there's, you know, with mushrooms, it's like, it's magic, you know. Today could have been the day, right? And I'm into it enough that you should know that, I mean, my first conversation with Raven tonight was I asked her if she'd found any mushrooms. And she hadn't. And you know, these are friends and we don't share where. But as good friends do, I will tell you where I find morel mushrooms. If you look out the windows there, see those far hills? I find them just a little bit beyond that, just up there in Jefferson County. It's a great place to find mushrooms. That's where I find it. And there's always people here that, you know, that even dear friends, they won't tell you where they find them. You'll hear stuff like along the river, or up in there's this piece of woods, you know, over there by that, you know, back, you can see it kind of, that piece. You get that type of thing, so. My reflection on the conference is what a great mix of people, you know, and I have to admit, I was, you know, in our age of skeptics, I was a utopian skeptic. When Paul first said, you know, we had to do a food utopia event, I wasn't opposed to that, but, you know, we're going to apply a grant for internal money at KU, and the grant's going to go to, really, it's kind of a biology-weighted art museum entity that's kind of unknown and mysterious that hands out this money. They're going to dismiss this as utopian. But, you know, Paul's a brash, young faculty member, a rookie, right? Freshman faculty. I thought, hey, go for it.
Better you than me, right?
Hey, and we found the mushrooms. Here we are. That's great.
Lyman Tower Sergeant scolded me today when we did the one-sentence introductions because I didn't mention my Food and Utopias book. So, for the camera, I have the Amazon.com picture of a book that I first talked to him about in 2002 at Oneida, New York, where silverware was made for many years. But John Humphrey Noyes started an intentional community there, and Communal Studies Association has had several meetings there during my academic career, and I threw out the idea to Lyman about editing a collection of essays on food and utopia, and that saw the light of day in 2006, Eating in Eden, Food and American Utopias. I have to read the title to remember it. But what I want to share at a personal level is that the dedication in that book is to my mother and to my sons, with the statement that my mother helped me to understand the value and meaning of food, and that I'm trying to pass that on to my sons. And at the conference today, in several of our conversations, we talked about the importance of talking about what success is and what progress is and how to measure progress, but we also talked about qualitative issues like quality of life, ethics, what's right, what's not right. And that dedication in the book is really coming out of the part of me that believes in those things. And so now that my mother is gone, and I still have two sons, what I've tried to explain to them is that there is something really valuable about how we produce our food, how we share it, how we take care of the remains. And the importance to me about being here today has been sharing that belief with a lot of like-minded people. So I want to say thank you to the people that allowed me to be here, Tim, I think, and then the other people that he knew that sent me the actual invitation. So it's been really important to me, and I hope that there will be some valuable conversations that continue after this.
I'm Rose Heap, and I wanted to take this opportunity to thank everybody for letting me join in on their great idea gathering, because it's given me a lot of insight and courage to further the personal teachings that I have in mind to help local citizens grow their own food. And I want to bring the idea out to the community of the Turnball building that used to be a place where people would do quilting and like a farmer's market and just issues in the political realm, all kinds of things. It's just like a community building. And we want to preserve that and use it as it was intended back in the 1800s again. And the LawrenceBarnDance.org is the website, and you can go there and probably read more information about how they are looking for grants and support from the community, the city, state, and federal levels to make this into, again, the most beautiful building that it used to be, and hold local barn dances there. And so I just wanted to make people aware of that. And when I saw a picture of this building on the information sheet that was handed out, I envisioned a garden around there with herbs and vegetables, and because there's a local need there, in not only in the East Lawrence but North Lawrence, for a community project to be started. And I know there's a lot of different organizations, like there's another one called East Side Village, where they talk about helping the elderly, have people come in with carpentry skills, plumbing, people that would make wheelchair ramp and make modifications for wheelchairs into homes. And since Lawrence is going to be a community a retirement community, there's going to be a lot of people coming from other states to Lawrence, because the word is getting out that we have a great number of resources for that very purpose. So I hope to have some of the students, if they're researching grants, that this might be one of the things that they can give back to the Lawrence community. So thank you for the spreading the word.
After I graduated from University of California, Santa Cruz with a degree in anthropology, I rode the coattails of my now husband and lived at a food utopia. Initially for a couple of months. The University of California, Santa Cruz has a 40-plus acre educational farm and garden program that's been running for over 40 years and has trained, at this point, thousands of farmers of all ages and different geographic and economic and social backgrounds, really from all over the world. So they live in tents that year. They used to live in teepees and now they live in fancy bungalows. But when we were there, they lived in tents, and I got to live in a tent for a couple of months in my food utopia. And what that food utopia looked like, if you could try and envision it here from Kansas, is a hilltop farm looking out over the Pacific Ocean with the redwood forest behind it in the middle of a meadow where you frequently see bobcats and coyotes and red-tailed hawks chasing golden eagles while you're dining from a beautiful handcrafted wood building that's overlooking all of this with glass windows. And you're surrounded by 40 co-apprentices who have come from all over the world to share the experience with you around food and the production of food. You get to be privileged to be with people like Karen Washington, who Fred was talking about, who's just really leading the movement in New York and being a national lesson, with somebody from Uganda who's increasing access there, and with people from age 18 to age 80. That was a food utopia for me, where 3 meals out of the day we would go out. 2 people would be assigned each day to go just walk out the front door of the farm center and down into the garden and harvest what was needed to produce incredible meals 3 times a day, right out your front door. And you eat looking where your food came from, and there's no question how it was produced because you did it and you learned how to do it. And I learned how to cook there. I was raised on a microwave, and this is all very new and novel and exciting. But so I was there for 2 months, and I left for a food dystopia. I moved to South Africa with the Peace Corps, and I was only there for 4 months. But I lived in 2 different areas there, incredibly impoverished areas, suppressed through, you can imagine what apartheid could do to a landscape, but it's really not that much different from many pockets of America, many pockets that were right by University of California, Santa Cruz, even within Santa Cruz and San Francisco, pockets of extreme poverty and super dystopia. And coming back from that experience of dystopia, and the dystopia landscape was a bunch of people who eat corn that was grown in Kansas, out in South Africa, and it has no nutritional value, and it's been ground up into white pap, and they raise their own chickens and goats, who often are eating plastic bags and trash to get by, and that's what they eat 3 meals out of the day. And they're suffering and they're sick, and again, it's not any different from many communities that we have driven by and perhaps stopped in or not here in the United States. So I returned. I had the privilege card, and I pulled it, and I returned to my privileged food utopia. And I decided that from then on I needed to figure out how to resolve the dystopia. And I'm really grateful to be able to share this space with people who can talk openly about those power dynamics, which has happened this weekend, and talk about the context that we find ourselves in the privileged positions that we're in, and how do we increase access to utopia-like solutions. How do we be the Karen Washington who says, oh, a building burned down, I better put a community garden in there. And really say, there's this really wonderful TED Talk, I don't remember the guy's name, but he's in South Central, and he says, if people want to meet with me, they don't come to my office, they come to my garden, and they meet with me in the garden, and they better get to work. Because if we're going to talk, we need to have our spade and shovel in the ground. And that is a food utopia to me happening in South Central right now. So for me, food utopia, University of California, Santa Cruz was not a full picture of a utopia, because it didn't have the level of access that I would like a utopia to have. And I really appreciate everybody in the room who has very clearly put intentional time into having that conversation this weekend.
I'm going to tell you about French fries. Did I get everybody's attention? Is there anybody here who doesn't like French fries? Really? I don't believe you. So here's the thing. I grew up under communism. You know, Hungary was really not the worst of central planning economies. But basically, there were regular food shortages. So it really took quite an effort, you know, to make sure that you get, you know, full nutrition. Institutional food, which is what I had 3 times a day at school, was bad. I mean, you know, you just didn't like it. But what I really liked is when my mom made French fries. And back then, the only way you could have French fries is if you made it at home. And if you ever made it, you know it's quite labor intensive, right? You have to peel it, wash it, cut it up, fry it, make sure it doesn't burn, make sure that it's actually cooked. But then the other thing you could do is have it as a side dish at a restaurant, but you could never order it on its own. You had to order some meat to go with it. And so on my first trip when I was 19 to the West, I mean, it just blew me away. For me, it was the ultimate sign of freedom. This was in Amsterdam, that you could walk on the street. There was a little wall, a little window in a wall, and you could get amazing French fries with mayonnaise. And I thought, wow, this is the West. I can eat French fries without having to work for it. I can have French fries without having to eat meat with it. And I can have it as often, as many times a day as I want it. So I really wanted that kind of food. For me, that was my food utopia. I was a picky eater, but French fries, I could eat that anytime. So then, you know, I married my hippie husband who took me to Santa Cruz. You know, French fries is not cool in Santa Cruz, right? It's not a healthy meal. So I felt a little shunned, you know. Typical East European immigrant comes to the West. You want to eat stuff that you couldn't eat back home. And it just didn't feel okay that my food choices were looked down upon by, you know, these people who could afford really healthy food. I mean, I really didn't know what healthy food was. We just ate pretty much what was there. And so maybe that's just a way to call on us to, and since then, of course, I also learned not to eat French fries quite as often, although I just had it today. But this is just by way of, you know, making sure that we're reflexive about what we consider to be proper food choice. Be patient with people. Recognize that different people have different visions of, you know, what is considered to be good eating. And never forget about where those visions and dreams come from.
Now, one thing I wanted to just reflect upon is about the food as cultural reproduction. And so we talk a lot about the need to preserve biological diversity. That's something we talked a lot about the last 2 days. Something we didn't talk about but is talked about increasingly is the need to preserve languages that are lost. And something that gets lip service, but really not much more than that, it seems, is the protection of culture. Cultural diversity. And we talk about it, but what does it really mean? And sometimes when I talk about food, to convey to students the importance of food beyond just nutrition is to convey how it plays into our cultural reproduction. And I like to give the personal example of how I am Czechoslovakian, Czech, and Irish. And I really have no attachment to my Irish ancestry. I'm very deeply connected to my Czechoslovakian ancestry, and the reason why that is has everything to do with food. And that is to say, when I grew up, I grew up eating rollikis, kolaches. I grew up eating a lot of Czechoslovakian food. I know some Czech, but all the Czech language I know centers around food, utensils in the kitchen, and sayings that go along with good food and how to say beer and all those sorts of things in the table, or that go around the table. And so when I like to think about food, I also like to think about how it's so integrally intertwined with with culture and our reproduction of culture, and how important food is in helping to also preserve cultural practices and tradition. And it's more than just about writing things down. We often like to inscribe or scribe and think that that's enough to save cultural practices. But I'll give you just one anecdote of how that's problematic. My grandma is the only person in my family that knows how to make kolaches. She is now 96 years old, and we decided a few years ago that somebody needs to learn how to make kolaches. So we asked her for the recipe, and we tried to make kolaches just based on the recipe. Total failure. And I, as a sociologist, somebody who talks about the importance of embodiment and the importance of practice, I should have known that. But it really just struck home the need for, when you talk about cultural reproduction, it literally is reproduction. You have to physically engage in that embodied practice of reproduction. And food is such an incredibly embodied activity. And that's precisely what makes food so precious and so special, is that in that embodied activity, you're creating a deep attachment to community, to family, to friends, to culture, and that's not something that we can just save in a gene bank or seed bank, but that is something we have to literally carry with us and convey to our children that same knowledge so they can literally carry it with us, because once we stop carrying it with us, even if it's stored away in some gene bank, we're not going to know what to do with that knowledge when we realize we need to do something with it. And so I just wanted to state that for everyone. Can I have a hallelujah? And then I'll be done with it.
First year I started a garden. I was living in Santa Cruz. This was 8 or 9 years ago. And I tore up the backyard. Nasturtiums are a weed out there. They just grow like ivy and cover the whole yard. So I pulled all those out, and I planted a bunch of tomatoes. And I'd read up a little bit about pruning tomatoes, for increased production. And I read into that a little too much. And so I went out there every morning and I was pruning and treating them like they were bonsai, and they were my babies. They looked so beautiful. They did not produce a single tomato. I lived with like 4 or 5 drunken construction workers who were divorced and had the greatest time making fun of my tomato garden. And so the next time it came to plant tomatoes in the ground, I was just horrified. And to this day, when I'm planting 600 tomatoes, I just have this fear of like, what if nothing happens and everybody makes fun of me? And so I think the moral of the story is, don't over-intervene with nature. Kind of let the process take its natural course. Also, growing food is not an easy thing, and I recommend to anybody to put a tomato plant in the ground and see what it takes to produce a tomato. You'll never go to the farmer's market again and be like, $3.50 a pound for tomatoes? You really need to be part of the production in order to have that appreciation for it.
So I guess I'm not up here to talk about my food utopia per se. I'm here to talk about a student's food utopia. I do quite enjoy teaching. I find it very gratifying in addition to the research that I do. And every now and then you get a student who just kind of blows your mind. And past summer, I had an English student taking my Sociology of Science, Technology, and Society course. And it was his last class as a college student, and he really wanted to make it count, and he just kind of threw himself into the coursework, and in a way that, you just recognize as an instructor. And, we kept in touch and so forth. Well, I should back up and say that, one of the things I try to do in that class is integrate science fiction. And Trent was an English student, as I said, and he really was trying to get into a headspace to write science fiction creatively. He was working at Jimmy John's, and that wasn't doing it. Right? Wages so low you'll freak. And to talk a little bit about Trent's world, wages so low you'll freak, coupled with the fact that during his break time at Jimmy John's, he wasn't allowed to read. Apparently, it's in the fine print if you work for this this company that you're not allowed to bring books to read on your break. So it was you know, Trent stopped by periodically a few times unannounced. He's like one of those few students who's allowed to do that, and it's okay. It's not during office hours, but hey, it's Trent, I'll give you 20 minutes. So Trent stopped by a few days before I departed to come here, and he sits down and he says, Grant, I sold all my stuff. I sold everything. He's like, I quit Jimmy John's. I sold all my stuff. I'm putting all my books in storage, and I'm just going west. He's like, I'm going to ultimately end up in Anchorage, Alaska, and he's going to work on a salmon boat. That's his food utopia, so to speak. And the idea is that he wants to put himself in a very strange, embodied situation in order to, you know, fire some synapses in a way that will encourage him to write really, really creative science fiction. So,
when we think of food utopias, it sort of stuns me a little bit, or it sort of puts me in an off position. And partly, I think it's because when we talk about food, so often in my experience, we talk about the contents of food, what comprises food, the materiality of food maybe, even what are the scientific contents of food. And one of the uncomfortable parts about the idea of food utopias for me was that immediately I thought, well, in my experience with looking at consuming sustainability, it's been a lot about consuming the label, right? What are the scientific contents in the food? And not to say that that's right or wrong, but when we see how it unfolds, I don't really see, or haven't seen a lot about social relationships, right? So when we focus a lot about purely nutrition or the scientific view of food, I feel like we're isolating the social. We're isolating our social, the place, the connectedness that we have with people, the relationships that emerge from the practice of food, the history of food, and culture. Not to say that there isn't a society in food, or that there isn't a social engineering or power aspect to food, because immediately when I think of food utopias, I think about the power relationships and reinscribing the inequalities that we have. One of the things I noticed in the conference that I was a little bit uncomfortable about, but I really wanted to see more on, was bridging the urban and the rural. And my experience in San Diego, which is interesting to me because it's a consumer-oriented society, right? I mean, you see where we used to grow food in San Diego, it was in the valleys, but guess what? They're paved over. They're paved over with concrete, freeways. We've got fresh and easy supermarkets to fill in the knowledge gaps that actually enjoy or I should say, make a fetish out of the knowledge gaps. And so the void in the valley is kind of like the void that we have in our knowledge. And that, to me, that's powerful because it is a social reproduction, and there's inequalities that go in with that when we think of urban communities that are not privileged to access the systems in place that would provide food. So one of the things I would have liked to talk about more today would be food access and hunger, really. And who has the privilege to feel hunger? How do we become hungry bodies? How is the alternative food movement addressing that? How do we see that hunger? How does food seen as an individual and isolated property become mobilized to reinforce inequalities? And I can see that more clearly in San Diego because it is more of a consumer-oriented place, right? Where we don't really grow our own food. We're trying to get back to that, right? People are trying to get back to that, but they're getting at it from different places. Right? They're getting at it from, wait, we don't have the infrastructure, right? And one of the projects I did was we had a vacant lot that the city of San Diego, rented out to us. And it was covered with rocks, and it was fenced in, and we had to dig all the rocks out. And my gosh, it was absolutely horrible because there was so much labor that went into that. And then we had to compost, right? And then there was also, okay, well, who gets to be part of this community garden? And what are the meanings that are around this community garden? And it's not to say that
recovering our food histories has to be necessarily in the state of Kansas. I think it can be happening everywhere. And so I think it's really important to have those transnational connections, or those connections between the urban and the rural. And so that was something I would have liked to talk about, was that, wait, we're all urban, we're all rural, we're all stitched from a similar cloth. And I think going back to history, culture, practice, but then also seeing the hierarchies that we can potentially reproduce and the particular ways that happens is, to me, really important. So it seems abstract right now, but I'm still working it out in my own life as a consumer.
So yeah, like I said earlier, I came from the Food Sovereignty Summit in Wisconsin, hosted by the Oneida Nation. We had some 250 tribal representatives there to talk about the different food systems projects and programs that are going on in Indian country currently. It was really interesting. We had activists there. Winona LaDuke, Dennis Banks were there. It was super exciting. My mom was there because I grew up in northern Illinois. I'm going to get to my mom's story. Well, so I grew up in northern Illinois in a little town called Durand, and I could literally walk across the street and be in Wisconsin. So I always, like, as a kid, I always was like, kind of was, envious, because I kind of really wanted to be a Wisconsinner. But I technically lived in Illinois, but we always went to the Wisconsin State Fair, and we went to the Wisconsin powwows, and we went and saw the Ho-Chunks and the Oneidas, and I was like, God, I just, really wish that we were just across the street, so I could say, I was a Wisconsinner. I love Illinois. So anyway, my mother stays with my brother, and he still lives in northern Illinois. And we're walking down the hall, and I had already met Dennis Banks. For anyone who doesn't know, he is one of the AIM founders of AIM, American Indian Movement, really active in the 70s, a lot of controversial things that happened back then. Leonard Peltier and anyway, look it up. It's interesting. We still need to get him out. Anyway, so I said, Mom, Dennis Banks is here. And she's like, he is? My mom's got 20 years on Dennis Banks, so put that in perspective a little bit. She said, he is? And I said, yeah, come on. And my mom's like this tall, right? So I've got her, and she's 74 years old, and we walk up to Dennis Banks, who's like this, and he's got his cowboy hat on, and he's got his Dennis Banks products, his maple syrup, and his ground rice flour, and I had already met him, and I said, hey, Dennis, I said, this is my mom, and she wants to meet you. And, he looked down at her, and he said, hi, nice to meet you. And my mom just stared at him for like 5 seconds. And she said, did you kill those FBI agents? And I just was like, I couldn't do anything, and he just, it took him about 10 seconds, and he said, no, but I wish I did. And yeah, so that was probably my best story. So anytime we walked by his son Tatanka, and I don't remember his daughter's name, we were talking with them, and my mom wasn't there, so I said, I'm really sorry about what my mom said earlier. And they're like, oh, that was your mom? And I was, because Dennis had already gone back and told his kids about this story. So it was really funny. But, it's a good conference, and I think there's a lot of overlap that we're talking about here. Of course, things in Indian country are varied and different. And when I think about food sovereignty, of course, a lot of my readings have been in the context of La Via Campesina in the international movement, and how they have used a framework of La Via Campesina to fight for their rights to produce and exchange and grow food that's culturally relevant, and live in a society that doesn't tell them they have to migrate to inner cities and that they can keep their way of life. Food sovereignty definitely looks different in Indian country in many ways, I think because the U.S. is a developed country, and that context is different, and even in Indian country it's different. But what I will say is that across the board, food sovereignty, perhaps food utopias too, for natives, is that we don't make so much a distinction between food and plants, animals, and the habitats that they need to have the best environments that they need. And a good example I would say is that we always say food is medicine, or whatever we're talking about, corn is mother, that life is all our relations. And so that I think, any context like that I think would add to any conversation that all life, that we're all related and interconnected. And the example I would give is Oneida had a wetland area that was very marginal, and they went and they looked at the surrounding land uses surrounding the wetland area, and they found that there is a lot of runoff situation and sedimentation happening because they were integrating some better land management practices. And so they began doing that. They began digging these ditches and banks so that the water would settle elsewhere. And over the course of just, I think, 3 or 4 years, wild rice is back in the wetlands. And it hasn't been known to be there for more than 150 years since they've been there. And the wildlife is back, and the elders are happy.
So, like I said, I feel really intimidated because everyone here is like experts and I'm just a student, and I'm not even studying, food systems or anything, but it's just kind of like been a hobby of mine. But I am 21, so I feel like I know everything, as most 21-year-olds. But I'll probably change my mind a million times. So right now, I guess where I'm at is that when I was in high school, my sister and my mother convinced me to become a vegetarian because it was on the basis of animal cruelty, and so they forced me to, watch those horrible PETA videos where you just are crying and it's awful. And so that was the basis of my decision, and now that I'm older, I've realized a lot of the health benefits and environmental aspects, and so that's the purpose of my website, is actually to focus on some of the pros and cons of being vegetarian, because I'm not sure if there is a perfect food system. I think there's always negative aspects to any way you eat. But I'm just trying to do what I feel is right morally and for the environment.
Asparagus is an easy crop. Easy. The easy thing for me is I need to go home to my mom's. My mom lives on the homesteaded farm that my Swiss grandparents homesteaded in 1871 near Guide Rock, Nebraska, which is misnamed. It should be Pawher, Nebraska, because that's the Indian name for the Guide Rock. But it's Webster County, Nebraska, which is Willa Cathers County. So my relatives homesteaded at the same time. And they did well with the farm. The first generation retired in California. The second generation built a new house, and at that new house they built in 1925, they planted asparagus. It was my grandmother's asparagus patch, and I don't remember her because she died when I was 2. We still pick from her asparagus crop, her patch. So that asparagus patch, as far as I can tell, was probably planted in 26 or 27. So it's an easy crop. I just need to go home.
I don't know how to grow anything, and it feels really funny to have my career right now, which somewhat feels like it's hanging in the balance. I've kind of staked a lot here. I'm realizing, you know, my chair was here. Anyway, I guess I don't care much about those things. So. I don't know how to grow anything. I'm not very good with food in actual fact, and I was speaking with my friend Grant, who now I can't see, so I can't like wink at him, so that's kind of a bummer. But the whole reason I got into studying food was based on less than a 5-minute conversation with a professor I worked with, and I was struggling with what I was going to study, and he said, "Oh, there's this organic farmer who lives between here and Peoria. You should go check that out." And I was easily influenced then. I'm easily influenced now, and it worked out. And I like to think that, yes, I planned all of this. That all of this was just this amazing linear progression. I expected to be at a great school with great colleagues and friends who are interested in the same things, but it has been one stumbling block over to the next of running into great people who were honest and kind and caring and passionate about things, and often that has been around food. And it's taken a lot of that research and book learning and classroom time and professors and fancy degrees to have me remember my own food history. And one of the more important people in my life was my grandmother, my maternal grandmother, who I lost in 2002, suddenly, very suddenly. And it was heartbreaking. And the one, you know, of many, but the memory I have is spending time with her in her kitchen in a rural town in Missouri, and in the house that my grandfather built where my mother and her 6 siblings grew up, in the town and the community that my family still spends time in. And my grandmother was famous for her cakes. She baked cakes, and she baked wedding cakes, and she baked birthday cakes. And the image I have, and I think some of you will remember, was a 5-gallon Rubbermaid jug, you know, plastic thing about yay high and this big, and it was filled with cake icing. And you know, every time I see the Betty Crocker or whatever little things, I'm just heartbroken, because I remember this huge cake icing Rubbermaid with the stamp, you know. It's got the physical thing you can rub your fingers over, like industrial braille, that you know it's Rubbermaid, and it's plastic, and it's the Graduate, you know, plastics. You can touch it. It's tactile. You can feel it, and you can know it, and you know everything that's gone into it. And every time I have a conversation about food, I kill everything I've ever tried to grow. But it's the relationships of people that are passionate about this that help me remember my grandmother and help bring that forward, that I think has been a real theme of this, is that it's not nostalgia like a disease that we've learned was a thing, but it's the gospel of community, that we bring our family and our traditions forward with us. And whether in a spirit of love or a spirit of companionship, a spirit of friendship, that there's a real passion that we recognize that there are some things that are wrong and there are some things that are right. And I feel so passionate that we're on the side of right now. So.
I wanted to tell a story about the first time I caught a fish. So, yeah. Okay. Well, the first time I caught a fish, I think I was with my dad at a lake, and I think I was fishing with my fishing pole, which my dad got for me. And then I was reeling in, and then I sort of got a pull, and then my dad said I probably got a fish, and then I reeled it in, and then I got a fish. So, how big was it? Probably about that big. Well, that was the first fish I caught, and I was little. I was like 4 probably. Wow. Yeah, I was probably about 4, and
Did you eat it?
No, it was too small.
Oh, you threw it back.
Well, we were fishing for fun, so we just threw them back. So they could grow more, then we catch them and then we eat them. So they don't really get a happy ending. Yeah, and now these days when I catch fish, I usually get one this big now. I get big ones, and then my dad goes to the house and he cleans them, and then we eat them. So the small ones sort of get a happy ending at first when they're small, but then when they get big, we eat them, so they don't really get a happy ending. Cause people get hungry, and sometimes, like cavemen, they go out and they didn't have grocery shops or anything like that when cavemen are alive. So cavemen have to go out and like eat monkeys or eat fish. They go in the lake, and they're like bears. They sort of just pick it out of the water, And I heard cavemen live in caves. And I think back in when nobody was alive that dinosaurs were there. And dinosaurs ate fish too. And crocodiles. Thank you, everybody. And I hope everybody had a good time.